This video is brought to you by Incogni. On Wednesday, US President Donald Trump announced a wave of massive tariffs as part of what he called Liberation Day, wreaking havoc across the global economy. Trump's objectives with these tariffs isn't entirely clear. In his speech, he gave a number of motivations, including rejuvenating American manufacturing, reducing America's trade deficit, and paying off the national debt. But none of these really feel satisfactory, not least because the main consequence of the tariffs seemed to be a recession. This is why some commentators have instead suggested this could all be actually part of a bigger, deeper plan to negotiate both a devaluation of the dollar and an unprecedented restructuring of America's massive debt pile. This might sound somewhat far-fetched, but this is exactly what Stephen Miran, the chair of Trump's Council of Economic Advisers, argued Trump should do in a recent paper titled A User's Guide to Restructuring the Global Trading System. So in this video, we're going to look at Miran's ambitious plan, often nicknamed the Mar-a-Lago Accord, and whether it could actually happen. Who's more influential, Trump or Putin? Well, we asked the TLDR team and audience to rank a bunch of powerful people, and we have the results. Find out the full list in the next copy of our magazine Too Long. Pre-order a copy by clicking the link in the description. To understand Miran's plan, you need to understand the severity of America's debt crisis. America's national debt to GDP ratio now stands at 123%, and in 2024 the US ran a deficit representing 6.4% of GDP, the largest in the OECD apart from Israel, and more than triple the 2% average for other advanced economies. This has all pushed the US dangerously close to what's known as a debt spiral, as it becomes more expensive to pay off the interest or service this debt pile, which means more debt, which means higher servicing costs, etc. Things look like they're going to get worse in the near term. The current Republican House budget would expand the deficit even further, and the latest Treasury Department report suggests the US has borrowed more money in the past 5 months than ever before. This problem will become more acute if Trump tries to devalue the dollar. This is something Miran called for in that paper, where he tentatively suggested that fixing America's trade deficit could require as much as a 15% dollar devaluation. And in July, Trump himself told Bloomberg that the dollar's strength is, quote, a big currency problem. For context, Trump and his advisors think that the dollar's strength is responsible for America's apparent deindustrialization, because the strength of the dollar makes American exports less competitive internationally, and allows Americans to import more foreign-made goods. A devaluation would exacerbate the debt problem in two ways. First, it would trigger a sell-off in US government bonds, known as Treasuries, because they would be paying less interest in real terms. And second, it could erode the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. Currently, the US dollar is the currency that central banks and other big financial institutions like to hold in their foreign exchange reserves, in large part because it's considered particularly safe, and there's an assumption that the dollar's value will remain relatively stable over time. Similarly, treasuries are now the world's reserve debt instrument, which creates lots of extra demand for treasuries and allows the US to borrow more. However, a rapid devaluation would undermine the dollar's standing, and if the dollar loses its status as the world's reserve currency, treasuries would probably also lose their status as the world's reserve debt instrument. Miran's solution to this conundrum is a multilateral currency agreement, where America's major trading partners agree to do certain things to strengthen their currencies, thus effectively devaluing the dollar. Miran has apparently been inspired by the Plaza Accord of 1985, where then-President Ronald Reagan convinced America's big trading partners, most notably Europe and Japan, to strengthen their currencies and boost demand for American goods. The Plaza Accord was named after the hotel where it was negotiated, hence why this prospective deal has been nicknamed the Mar-a-Lago Accord. To avoid a debt crisis, however, Miran suggests not only that America's allies continue to hold and buy treasuries, but that they accept a so-called rescheduling of the treasuries they currently hold. Basically, all treasuries have a so-called maturity, which is when they pay out their face value. If you buy a 10-year treasury with a face value of $1,000, for instance, you get a bit of interest every 6 months for 10 years, and then at the end of 10 years you get the full $1,000. At the moment, the average weighted maturity of US Treasury debt is about 6 years. Miran's plan here is to basically say to America's trading partners that they're not actually going to pay out the face value. Rather, they're going to reschedule the maturity for some later date. In his paper, Miran suggests using century bonds, i.e. treasuries that only pay out after 100 years, or even so-called perpetual bonds, which don't even have a set maturity date. This would obviously massively ease America's debt burden, but it's a pretty terrible deal for America's big trading partners. So how does Miran plan to get them to agree to all this? Well, he argues that America's trading partners essentially owe it to the US for providing a security umbrella. But if they're not persuaded by this watertight argument, Miran gives 3 ways the US could convince them. 1, the stick of tariffs, 2, the carrot of the defense umbrella and the risk of losing it, and 3, central bank tools. And this is why some people think Trump could be trying to negotiate a so-called Mar-a-Lago Accord. He's whacking tariffs on all America's big trading partners, and threatening to draw down America's military presence in NATO and elsewhere, exactly as Miran suggests. Similarly, senior members of Trump's team have echoed Miran's ideas. Last year, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, for instance, argued that the US should force NATO states that weren't spending enough on defense to buy what he called 50-year military bonds from the US. So, will this actually work? Well, we're not convinced. For starters, the Plaza Accord was made doable by the fact that, back then, America's main trading partners were also its allies. This is no longer true. America's biggest trading partner, and one of the biggest international treasury holders, is China, and it's hard to see Xi signing up to this. To be honest, given the current state of US-EU relations, it's hard to see even the Europeans signing up, as the offer of an American security umbrella isn't quite as tempting as it used to be, now that Trump has proved so willing to withdraw it. But even if Trump does negotiate a rescheduling of these countries' treasury holdings, it's not clear that this would be enough. After all, 75% of all treasuries are held domestically, and these would still be affected by a sharp devaluation. All in all, while there's clearly an intellectual infrastructure around Trump, it does look like the White House's trade policy is currently being decided by Trump on a whim, and the idea that this is actually 4D chess to reorder the global trade system feels somewhat implausible. Now, as we've demonstrated in this video, there's a huge amount of uncertainty in the world of politics and current affairs, often with few easy solutions. Unfortunately, this can be the case online too. There are all kinds of bad actors out there that want to try and use you to make a quick buck. Take, for instance, data brokers. They sell your data to businesses and marketing agencies, leading to more spam calls, texts, and emails. Or, even worse, they can sell your data to even worse actors, who can then go on to use your identity. Some data brokers have even been charged with conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud for intentionally supplying data lists of elderly and vulnerable people to scammers. Fortunately, today's sponsor, Incogni, can help to rectify this. They work on your behalf to request your personal data removal. They also deal with any objections, and to make sure that your personal information isn't shared by the broker again, conduct repeated removal requests. And with their friends and family plan, they will even do this for you and up to 3 of, well, your friends and family. So create an account with our link in the description, grant Incogni the ability to work on your behalf, and sit back as they make you safer. Plus, by using our link, you'll get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Thanks for checking it out, and thanks to Incogni for sponsoring this video.